Good Monday. It's no longer morning, it's afternoon, but I wanted to take just a few minutes to give a number of you what you asked for, and that was some lecture material by video. I don't want to bore you with a long talk, but for those of you that feel that some lecture from me will assist you with understanding the materials, I'm going to take a few minutes to do that. Although I do think and encourage you to spend some good time with those video clips on the ethics, different ethical philosophies, moral philosophies. We do that in the face-to-face class, so I expect you to do that here as well. They will help you understand beyond what I'm able to do in these few minutes. But I wanted to start with the quote for the week that you'll see in the slides. The truth will make you free, but not until it's finished with you. That's David Foster Wallace, who is quoted in the Everyday Virtue video clip, which I think you'll find really interesting, which is another way of talking about existentialism as an ethical approach. Someone else who said something similar was John in the Bible. I imagine that's where David Foster Wallace picked it up. It's from John 8:31 to 32. Those of you that are theologians and seminary students are familiar with the truth will set you free, as Jesus was speaking to his disciples. Another fairly famous quote comes from Gloria Steinem, the famous American feminist and political activist, who's probably more in line with David Foster Wallace. She says, "The truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off." Excuse my language, that's a quote from Gloria Steinem. So what's the point of that in the beginning of this little mini lecture? It has to do with the concept of ethics, leadership ethics, making ethical decisions as leaders. Ethical decision making is all about finding the good, finding the true, finding that which is going to liberate or save or help or redeem. Use whatever words you want to describe the good, but ethics is all about determining what, quote, the good, unquote, is in every situation. Unfortunately, it's not so easy. And of course, as David Foster Wallace has to say, and what Gloria Steinem is telling us, is that once you do figure that out, you're going to feel pretty beat up because it's such hard work to make those kind of difficult decisions, and you're very likely not going to be terribly happy with what you find, not just about the situation, but about yourself as the decision maker. Of course, that isn't true in every case, but I think it adds a level of understanding that making ethical decisions is not easy, and it also means that we need to change the way we think or the way we see things when we're making those decisions. So as you will see in the slides and the reading and the video clips, one of the areas of ethical decision making is something called teleology. Teleology means that we're focused on the outcome. And when we make our decision, we're looking at what the results are going to be or what the consequences are going to be. When I do X, Y, Z, is the result going to be good? And there's 3 different forms of teleology. The one that's posted in your video clip is probably the one that is most often applied in an organizational setting. I do want you to understand thoroughly the moral philosophy, the ethical approach of utilitarianism. So, what is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is I'm going to make my decision based on the greatest good for the greatest number. But that's not the end of the story. Oftentimes, students will get confused because they'll stop there and say, well, I'm a utilitarian because I want to make decisions based on the greatest good for the greatest number. But have you also considered the second part of utilitarianism? And that is that greatest good for the greatest number is going to come at a cost for a few. Utilitarianism is exactly that. It's about utility. It's about it's a cost benefit analysis. It's looking at what is the price I'm going to pay in order to have the greatest good for the greatest number. Where am I going to cut? Who's going to suffer as a result? It's the typical thing that leaders do when they're deciding who has to be laid off when the organization is in financial trouble. Those people are going to be hurt. But in making that decision, the business is saved, and many more jobs are saved than those that are cut. That's just an example of utilitarianism. The video clip is really good at helping explain utilitarianism, and please take time to watch that and think about what is utilitarianism, what does it mean, and how do people make decisions when they operate from the principle of utility. The other two teleological, in other words, outcome-related approaches. Greek is teleos or teleo is Greek for outcome, result, end result. Ethical egoism is a form of teleology. And the ethical egoist looks at the outcome, but instead of looking at the outcome for the greatest number, as the utilitarian does, they're making a decision based on what's the best outcome for me and my group. How am I going to decide? So somebody in an organization might decide not to blow the whistle, even though they know bad things are going on in the organization, because they're worried about losing their job, they're worried about losing their livelihood for supporting their family, and so on. They may get to a point where they have to do it anyway. But the initial desire is to protect self and group, whether that be family, community, church, what have you. And so ethical egoism is a desire to protect self in that smaller group. But it's still about the outcome. It's just a much narrower frame of reference than when you're talking about utilitarianism. Then the complete opposite of ethical egoism is altruism. We really don't examine altruism until week 4, when we examine servant leadership, because servant leaders are altruistic. And so you don't need to talk about that this week, but I want to just mention it as a teleological theory. If you are an altruist, you are looking for the greatest outcome for others. You're willing to sacrifice yourself and your family if need be, like Martin Luther King Jr., for instance, for the greater good. And so you're willing to bring harm to those you love, or your employees, or yourself, in order to get the best outcome for the suffering in the world, or for others, for a just cause. That's altruism. So that's teleology. The second group of ethical decision-making formats or moral philosophies is called deontology instead of teleology. Deon is the Greek for, or dio, or dion, those Greek scholars can correct me, is the Greek for duty. So instead of looking at the outcome, instead you're looking at what's the right thing to do regardless of the outcome. When you are operating from deontology, you're operating either from Kant's universals or categorical imperative that says certain things are always right and certain things are always wrong. It is always wrong to kill, for instance. Or it is always wrong to, um, as the Ten Commandments say, to covet a neighbor's belongings. The Ten Commandments are a form of deontology, a form of rules that are establishing universals for those in the Jewish faith. Deontology often comes as rules as well as abstract universals that sometimes are harder to determine. My grandmother used to have a needlepoint hanging above the bed that I would sleep in when I would visit her, and the needlepoint said, "When the one great scorer comes to mark against your name, he'll judge not whether you won or lost, but how you played the game." So, a good deontologist will take the F rather than cheat on a test. That's deontology. You're looking at what's the right thing to do based on some kind of rules or code that you have. Um, the um, the video that's posted is interesting. It's based on a film, The Kingdom of God. It gets at the more Kantian version of deontology, but it helps, I think, to understand what it's like to live as someone who always lives up to their principles, or how they were taught to behave, a list of their truths that they need to live by. I think I'm going to post another video for you on deontology. For those of you that want another perspective besides the one given in the Kingdom of God, and it's from the same guy that's giving you the one on utilitarianism and virtue ethics. So let me just skip over now to virtue ethics. I can't do it nearly as well as the video clip, but virtue ethics is quite different than teleology and deontology in that it's not so much about what's the right decision or what's the right outcome. It's more about who am I as the individual that's making this decision or this choice. What is my character? And when I've made this decision, am I going to feel that I am living my life to the best of my ability? Not if I made the best decision, but am I being the best form of myself? Have I really learned the virtues? And am I living them well? And when I go to bed at night, do I feel like I've had a really good day, a life well lived in the day that I've had? Am I going to be proud to tell my mother or my spouse about what I've done today? Virtue ethics is the Christian list of virtues. I mentioned deontology as being the Ten Commandments. It's the Beatitudes. Instead of saying people are virtuous when they do this, in the Gospel of St. Matthew, I think it's the Gospel of St. Matthew, yeah, in which the Sermon on the Mount is, and Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in heart," etc. Meaning these are the Christian virtues, and Jesus meant them to be lived, not just setting them up as ideals. Because if you operate from virtue ethics, you learn to live out the virtues. They're not just an ideal to strive for. Watch the video on virtue ethics. Again, gives you much more information. That's it for the week 2 video that will help you with your first assignment. The second assignment, as I said in my previous video, is about minimum wage. Take a look at both of those sides. Make a case for one, and then using the other one argue against the case you've just made. But also, the person who says that minimum wage is justified. What is their moral philosophy? Is it teleology, deontology, or virtue? The person that says minimum wage is not justified. What is their ethical perspective? So, as you're looking at these debate topics, you're understanding that both approaches are ethical. They just come from somebody who's looking at these issues with a different ethical framework. As I've always said to you, please don't hesitate to contact me if you have questions. I hope this video helps. I'll talk to you soon.